Well, hello again, everybody. We have made it to Friday, one of the darkest days of all humanity, but also one of the brightest for the reasons for why it occurred. The events of today are very hard for us to visualize, they're hard for us to read about, they're hard for us to imagine as we think about what Jesus went through. But the result of that day is that Christ gave his life for us. Something that was not just good, but something that was great and something that we can be eternally thankful for. There's so much to go into today. I want to just go ahead and dive into the events of the day and the timeline of the day. Uh, just before dawn on Friday morning, we see Jesus' betrayal, his arrest, and his desertion by the disciples. Judas, the betrayer, brought men with swords, torches, other weapons to come and arrest Jesus while he was there in the garden as he was praying. He was betrayed with one of the most intimate of gestures, one that shows great familiarity, one that shows a close relationship. He was betrayed with a kiss, as Judas did it, and even Jesus questioned Judas, "Is this how you're going to betray me?" Peter, of course, trying to protect Jesus, cut off the ear of the high priest's servant. Jesus told him to put the sword away. He even healed the servant by putting his ear back on. And he used a phrase there that was used many times as he talked about that related to his upcoming suffering. He said in John 18:11, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" The cup relates to suffering, which has been used as a picture and is used as a picture throughout the Old Testament, throughout the New Testament. The cup is symbolic of judgment. And Jesus, acknowledging that he was going to suffer the judgment of the sin of the world upon himself, but he also acknowledged that he was still in control, even in the midst of this. Matthew 26, 53 to 56, as he was being arrested, he said to them, "Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? How then will the scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must happen this way?" At that time, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as you would against a robber? Every day I used to sit in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets." Jesus showing again that he was in ultimate control. No matter who betrayed him, no matter how many came to arrest him, Jesus was in control of all of this from the very beginning. At this point, all the disciples fled, left Jesus there with his accusers. And then as Jesus is led away, he is led away to what we would call his trials. Uh, Experts have told us that the Jewish trials were illegal in at least 12 different ways. But he goes to his trials, two sets of trials. The first three were before Jewish leadership. John records that he first went before Annas. Annas had been the high priest. He had been removed by the Romans about 15 years before these events, but somewhat like a mafia leader. His five sons, his son-in-law Caiaphas, who was high priest at the time, had all served as high priest, and he still held a lot of control through them. So he had really not given up control, even though he had been kicked out of the office. And Jesus received his first physical mistreatment during this time. He was then led before Caiaphas, the high priest. It was Caiaphas who earlier had unknowingly mentioned a great truth in John chapter 11, verse 50. "Do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish?" He was speaking of Jesus being killed so that the Jews would not be in trouble with the Romans. But of course, we know that Jesus, as one man, died so that the entire world could be saved. if they would only accept the salvation. While he was in front of Caiaphas, he was blindfolded, he was mocked, he was struck because of just the vile treatment that he was receiving. After dawn, he was then taken before the Sanhedrin, who condemned him of blasphemy for saying that he was indeed the Messiah, the Son of God. Well, after this, knowing that they could not put Jesus to death, the Jews began to drag him before the Roman officials. But in the middle of these trials before the Jews, two key players in the account have a side story going on, as it were. Peter had denied Jesus during this time 3 times, just as Jesus had foretold that he would. And then also Judas, racked with terrible guilt, tried to return the money that he had been given to betray Jesus, and filled with remorse and regret and guilt, went out and killed himself. Of course, Peter was restored and forgiven, while Judas would face the eternal consequences for his choices. Then after this, the next 3 trials that Jesus faced were before Roman officials. First, before Pilate. It's interesting and very sad. John 18:28. The chief priest, the officials of the Jews would not enter Pilate's home, the Praetorium. They would not go into the home of a Gentile. John 18:28. They themselves did not enter into the Praetorium so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. They were more worried about ritual cleanliness and ritual observations than they were about what they were doing to the living Son of God. They were worried about ritual, they were worried about ceremony, and not about the truth. Here, the Jews acknowledged that they could not be the ones to put Jesus to death. Only the Romans could do it, which would involve crucifixion, which would again fulfill the prophecies that had been made about Jesus' death. Again, Jesus is in control of all of this. Finding no fault and pondering the big question, what is truth? Pilate sent Jesus to his second trial, which was before Herod. Well, Herod only wanted to see a miracle. Herod wasn't interested in it. He had Jesus dressed in gold. He had him mocked, and then sent him back to Pilate for his third trial. And slowly and reluctantly, but also in fear of an uprising, so that he too wouldn't face the wrath of the Romans, Pilate surrendered to the demands of the Jews. The chief priest got the people riled up to shout for the release of Barabbas, a criminal, and to crucify Jesus. To try to pacify them, Pilate had Jesus scourged. And I think of all the things in the Bible, there's one word there, but there's so much behind that. And if you are interested in reading some of the medical details of what Jesus endured during this time, I'm going to put them right below this in the comment and the information section below the video, if you want to click on that link and just see from a doctor's perspective what Jesus went through during these days. But he had him scourged, which was an agonizing torture itself. The crown of thorns placed on his head. He was beaten, but the people were not satisfied, and they shouted even louder for him to be crucified. Pilate washed his hands of the matter, although not of his guilt in taking part of it, and turned Jesus over. And of course, he went to be crucified. He, on his way to Golgotha, carrying the crossbeam on his back, too exhausted physically, spiritually, emotionally, from the agony in the garden, the many hours now without sleep, a merciless beating, loss of blood. Jesus could not carry the cross any longer, and the Romans compelled Simon of Cyrene to take it for him. Well, as he was nailed to the cross, in the first 3 hours of that time, from 9 a.m. until noon, there were the 3 of the sayings that Jesus made from the cross. He famously said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." A powerful message from the cross of still his love and his compassion toward even those who were putting him to death. To the repentant thief, he promised him that today you will be with me in paradise. He took care of his mother in telling her to behold her son as she was giving her into the care of the apostle John. During that 3 hour period, the soldiers gambled for his clothing. The multitudes would pass by and mock him and scoff at him. And then in the second 3 hours, we see supernatural events happening from noon until 3. The earth became covered in darkness. There were 4 sayings more from Jesus when he asked, "Why have you forsaken me?" To the Father, as the sin of humanity was poured out upon Jesus, and the Father turned his face from him. He said, "I thirst," from the loss of fluids and the time that he has been spending on the cross. He says, "It is finished." Again, even then, being in control, even to the moment of his death. And then as he closed his eyes, he says, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." At the moment Jesus died, there were many other supernatural activities that happened. The veil of the temple was torn in half from the top to the bottom, symbolizing that there was no more need for animal sacrifices in the Holy of Holies, as Jesus was our high priest who entered in for one time and for all. There was darkness. There was a great earthquake. There were dead that rose from the tombs and walked among the people. Of course, Satan and his minions had to think that they had won a wonderful battle. But we know that Jesus won the ultimate victory. Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate, asked for the body. Once the spear was put into his side and the water and the blood came out, Jesus was removed from the cross before his legs were broken, again fulfilling prophecy that no bones would be broken. He was laid in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Notice that during his life, Jesus had no place to lay his head. Even at death, he had no tomb of his own in which to be buried. He was buried in a borrowed tomb, but it only needed to be borrowed because he was only going to need it for just a few days. Because we know that as terrible as the events were on Friday, there was a great event happening on Sunday as Jesus was going to rise from the dead. What a dark day this had to be for those close to Jesus. His enemies had to be celebrating that this man that had been a thorn in their side for so long was now gone. It seemed the light had gone out on the people's hopes. But as we know, they only needed to wait a little bit, because as dark as Friday was, there's a great day coming on Sunday as Jesus defeats death. Tonight we'll gather for a Good Friday service. We'll talk about many of these things tonight. We hope you can be with us at 5 o'clock. That will also be recorded and available for you to watch later. Have a great day. Take the time today to reflect upon what Christ has done for us, what he went through for us. There'll be, like I said, some resources in the information section right below this video. Link to the doctor's account of the crucifixion. There'll be a link to a couple of other videos and some songs for you to reflect with and to enjoy today. Well, have a great Friday. Enjoy your Good Friday. Reflect upon the love and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. We'll see you soon.